Ani Jayek. Hello, friends. Mirageshget. I hope you're having a wonderful day. And welcome back to our Braiding Sweetgrass series book club. And we're on episode 9. As many of you know, I like to get started. Smudging is part of my culture, but do whatever helps you to get grounded. That's part of your culture or just part of your routine. I like to smudge. Some people like to go for a walk or just a little prayer or a moment of silence. Whatever you need to do to stay present so that we're not thinking of all the other things we need to be doing or multitasking. We don't want to multitask during this. We want to stay focused so we can really dive into this book and have some serious but fun discussion. And then make sure you're all relaxed, roll your shoulders. Take a big deep breath. Now we're ready. Okay, so now we are on page 141. We're at Wiskak Kokpinigan, a black ash basket. Donk, donk, donk. Silence. Donk, donk, donk. The back of the axe meets the log to make a hollow music. It drops 3 times on one spot, and then John's eyes shift a fraction down the log, where he strikes again. Donk, donk, donk. As he raises the axe above his head, his hands slide apart on the upstroke, then together on the down, shoulders pulling tight under his chambray shirt, his thin braid jumping with every impact. All the way down the log he pounds, triplets of crushing blows. Straddling the end of the log, he works his fingers under a split in the cut end and gives it a tug. Slow and steady, he peels off a strip of wood the width of the axe head in a thick ribbon. He takes up the axe and pounds another few feet. Donk, donk, donk. Again, he grasps the base of the strip and peels it back along the pounded line, taking the log apart strip by strip. By the time he pounds the last few feet, he has worked off an 8-foot splint of gleaming white wood. He holds it to his nose to breathe in the goodness of the new wood and passes it around for us all to see. John coils it into a neat hoop, ties it fast, and hangs it on a nearby tree branch. Your turn, he says, and hands off the axe. So in this chapter, Robin and quite a few other people are taking a class to learn how to make ash baskets. And it's the class is done by it's a Potawatomi family called the Pigeon family, who have been master basket makers for generations. They have done this from time immemorial. Um, and they're really one of our last great basket makers. At our Heritage Center at the Potawatomi Nation, a citizen band, his baskets are on display, or their baskets are on display, and they are incredible. The detail. They've made strawberry shaped baskets and large giant baskets. It's incredible. And if you've ever tried to make a basket before, it isn't as easy as it looks, especially a beautiful one out of black ash bark. It's something they teach to their children and grandchildren. It has been going on for a long time. Okay, so I'm going to read a little bit on page 142. When John was a kid, the sound of log pounding was heard all through the community. Walking home from school, he could tell who was out working by the sound of their swinging. Uncle Chester was a hard, fast crack, crack, crack. From across the hedgerow, he could hear Grandma Bell's slow thuds separated by a long pause while she caught her breath. But now the village grows quieter and quieter as elders walk on, and kids seem more interested in video games than in tromping through the swamp. So John Pigeon teaches any who will come to pass on what he's learned from the elders and the tree. It's kind of sad, but it's true, isn't it? Like the rest of the family, John is also a master teacher, committed to sharing what what has been passed on by generations who came before. What was given to him, he now gives back to the people. Some basket classes I've taken start with a neat pile of materials, all assembled on a clean table. But John doesn't hold with the teaching weaving where the splits come easily ready made. He teaches basket making, beginning with a living tree. So then she goes on to talk about, she's a botanist, right? So she is going to talk about where these come from, and basically they like their feet wet, so on the edge of riverbanks, swamps, that sort of thing. um, and yet it's not enough to simply find black ash. It has to be the right one, a tree ready to be a basket, an ideal basket. Ash has a straight, clear bole with no branches on the lower trunk. Branches make knots that interrupt the straight grain of the splint. A good tree is about a hand breadth across, the crown full and vigorous, a healthy tree, a tree that has grown directly upward toward the sun, straight and fine grained, while those that have wandered a bit to find the light show twists and turns in the grain. Some basket makers will choose only trees perched on a hummock in the swamp, while others will avoid a black ash growing next to a cedar. Trees are affected by their sapling days as much as people are by their childhoods. The history of a tree appears in its growth rings, of course. Good years yield wide rings, poor year a thin one, and the pattern of rings is critical to the process of basket making. So moving on, we're on page 144 now. John has developed a practiced eye for these things, but sometimes, just to be sure, he'll unsheath his knife and cut a wedge for a look at the rings. John prefers a tree in the range of 30 to 40 growth rings, each ring as wide as a nickel. When he's found the right one, the harvest begins, not with a saw, but rather a conversation. Traditional harvesters recognize the individuality of each tree as a person, a non human forest person. Trees are not taken but requested, respectfully. The cutter explains his purpose and the tree is asked permission for harvest. Sometimes the answer is no. It might be a cue in the surroundings, a vireo nest in the branches, or the bark's adamant resistance to the questioning knife that suggests a tree is not willing, or it might be the ineffable knowing that turns him away. If consent is granted, a prayer is made and tobacco is left as a reciprocating gift. The tree is felled with great care so as not to damage it or others in the fall. Sometimes a cutter will make a bed of spruce boughs to cushion the landing of the tree. When they finish, John and his son hoist the log to their shoulders and begin the long walk home. I think that is so important for us to discuss. How often do we just take something and ask permission? How often do we look at something and know its origin of where it came from? A basket, for example, you can look at it and say, well, it comes from the black ash, or maybe it's a pine needle basket or sweetgrass basket, and then you know its origin. But how many of us look at a table and know its origin, or a pencil or piece of paper and know its origin, and wonder if it gave its consent or if it was asked in the first place? How many of us actually acknowledge the things that we have and acknowledge where it came from? I think that's a very important lesson and something for us to think about and definitely discuss. So drop what you think in the comments. I also want you all to know that I really do appreciate your comments. There's been a few people where we've had a great dialogue and I've been able to learn more about you and what your thoughts are, and our stories are so much alike. And I really love to hear your thoughts. So please I don't want to be the only one talking here. So please drop your comments and your discussions and ideas and experiences. I read them all. So this is it's a longer chapter, not super long, but it's longer. So I don't want to read too much. I want there to be more discussion. So I'm skipping over to page 147. And at this point, the class has learned how to split or tried to learn how to split um, the strips that have come off the tree. And they're large hoops, long strips that then he folds into a hoop to hang. Um, and then so they've got all that done. He's having them do everything from start to finish. Uh, and so I think that's brilliant. Um, so then John says, people get a little mad when they see the prices. John says, people think it's just basket weaving, but 80% of the work comes long before you weave. With finding the tree, pounding and pulling and all, you barely make minimum wage. So the next time you go to powwow or to a gathering and you'll probably see master basket weavers there, and you'll probably see the pigeon family. Um, just know the work that goes into indigenous art. And so when the prices are high, no, that's still minimum wage for the maker. Keep that in mind before you get upset at prices. Okay, with splints finally prepared, we're poised for weaving. What we had mistakenly thought was the real work of a basket. But John stops the class, his gentle voice gaining a hard edge. You've missed the most important thing, he says. Look around you. We look at the forest, the camp, at each other, at the ground, he says. In a circle around each novice is a litter of scraps. Stop and think what you're holding. That ash tree was growing out there in that swamp for 30 years, putting out leaves, dropping them, putting out more. It got eaten by deer, hit by freeze, but it kept working year in and year out, laying down those rings of wood. A splint fallen on the ground is a whole year of that tree's life. And you're about to step on it, bend it, grind it into the dirt. That tree honored you with its life. There's no shame in messing up a splint. You're just learning. But whatever you do, you owe that tree respect and should never waste it. And so he guides us as we sort through the debris we've made. Short strips go into a pile for small baskets and decoration. The miscellaneous bits and shavings get tossed into a box to be dried and used for tinder. John keeps to the tradition of the honorable harvest. Take only what you need and use everything you take. Now, this is a huge lesson. So many of us come from the disposable world where everything is disposable: paper napkins, paper towels, disposable plastic tubes, containers, everything is disposable. And now we have this huge problem of waste. And I feel personally that it's because we are the throwaway nation. Um, and we don't know where things come from. We don't stop for that acknowledgement of what, if you have a piece of glass, where did that come from? The metal that is around your chairs or your buttons, where did that come from? Or simple things like a pencil or a pen. And so we don't acknowledge what form it came from the beginning, and then it's easier to throw away. One of the lessons that it taught both myself and my children was I started a little chicken flock. I started with like 4 chickens, and now we have 40. But with doing that, it takes a lot of work. If you don't work well and treat them well with respect, you don't get eggs and you don't get meat. It's just as simple as that. But then the happier your chickens are, the healthier they are, the more eggs you're going to get. Um, so it's that reciprocity kind of relationship. Plus, knowing that, so when we sit down to eat chicken for a meal, we all know why we're eating. It came from another life that we loved and cherished and raised and helped make happy, but now it gave its life so that we can live. There's a whole lot less waste because of that. Before then, I would get meat at the grocery store, and I still do get meat at the grocery store, and it's wrapped in its nice plastic and put in the fridge. And we've all forgotten about it or spent too many days figuring out what we're going to do with it, and it goes bad. And then we just throw it in the garbage. Now it has a totally different meaning for my family. Um, that meat that went bad in the fridge isn't just a pile of plastic that I throw into the garbage can. It was a life, and because it wasn't respected enough to be remembered, um, it's just garbage. And so there's a lot more respect, a lot more um, acknowledgement from us when it comes to any sort of food that we put into our bodies or prepare. And I feel like if we could pass that on to everything that we do in our life, before we buy something, before we sell something, before we throw something away, if we have at least that acknowledgement, I think that things might be a whole lot different in this country. Um, but let me know what you think about that. Drop it in the comments. Okay, so now we're on page 151. John calls us back to the circle for the next step, assembling the bottom of the basket. We're doing a traditional round bottom, so the first two strips are laid out at right angles in a symmetrical cross. Easy. Now take a look at what you've done, John says. You've started with the four directions in front of you. It's the heart of your basket. Everything else is built around that. Our people honor the four sacred directions and the powers resident there. When the two basket strips meet at the intersection of those four directions is right where we stand as humans, trying to find balance among them. See there, John says, everything we do in life is sacred. The four directions are what we build on. That's why we start like that. I think that's a perfect lesson right there, too. And so then they go on, they end up making 8 spokes that the basket will go onto. And Robin is going to explain the first 3 levels and how it's a little hard. Okay, so, but then John says, you're on your own. The design of the basket is up to you. No one can tell you what to create. We have thick and thin splints to work with, and John shakes out a bag full of brightly dyed splints in every color. The tangled pile looks like the singing ribbons on the men's ribbon shirts in the evening powwows. Just think of the tree and all its hard work before you start, he says. It gave its life for this basket, so you know your responsibility. Make something beautiful in return. Responsibility to the tree makes everyone pause before beginning. Sometimes I have that same sense when I face a blank sheet of paper. For me, writing is an act of reciprocity with the world. It is what I can give back in return for everything that has been given to me. And now there's another layer of responsibility, writing on a thin sheet of tree and hoping the words are worth it. Such a thought could make a person set down her pen. So again, she's talking about that acknowledgement of where everything comes from, a piece of paper. We just don't think about it, the paper that this wonderful book is written on. Okay, now she goes on. The first 2 rows of the basket are the hardest. On the first go round, the splint seems to have a will of its own and wants to wander from the over-under rhythm around the circle. It resists the pattern and looks all loose and wobbly. This is when John steps in to help, offering encouragement and a steady hand to anchor the escaping splints. The second row is almost as frustrating. The spacing is all wrong, and you have to clamp the weaver in place to get it to stay. Even then, it comes loose and slaps you in the face with its wet end. John just laughs. It is a mess of unruly pieces, nothing like a whole. But then there's the third row, my favorite. At this point, the tensions of over is balanced by the tensions of under, and the opposing forces start to come into balance. The give and take, reciprocity, begins to take hold, and the parts begin to become a whole. The weaving becomes easy as splints fall snugly into place. Order and stability emerge out of chaos. In weaving well being for land and people, we need to pay attention to the lessons of the three rows. Ecological well being and the law of nature are always the first row. Without them, there is no basket of plenty. Only that first circle is in place. Can we weave the second? The second reveals material welfare, the subsistence of human needs, economy built upon ecology. But with only two rows in place, the basket is still in jeopardy of pulling apart. It's only when the third row comes that the first two can hold together. Here's where ecology, economics, and spirit are woven together by using materials as if they were a gift and returning that gift through worthy use. We find balance. I think that third row goes by many names: respect, reciprocity, all our relations. I think of it as the spirit row. Whatever the name, the three rows represent recognition that our lives depend on one another. Human needs being human needs being only one row in the basket that must hold us all. In relationship, the separate splints become a whole basket, sturdy and resilient enough to carry us into the future. That's a really good paragraph. I would really like to know your thoughts on that. You hear me talking all the time, but I want to hear your stories. Okay. Now we're moving on. I'm on page 54. And now, so they're all done. They've lined up to take a picture. They've got all their baskets. And John, he says, beaming like a proud father, "Look what you've learned today. I want you to see what the baskets have shown you. Every one of them is beautiful. Every one of them is different, and yet every one of them began in the same tree. They are all made of the same stuff, and yet each is itself. That's the way it is with our people, too. All made of the same thing, and each their own kind of beautiful." That night, I see the powwow circle with new eyes. I notice that the cedar arbor sheltering the drums is supported by poles set in four directions. The drum, the heartbeat, calls us out to dance. There is one beat, but each dancer has a distinctive step: dipping grass dancers, crouching buffalo dancers, the twirl of fancy shawl dancers, high-stepping jingle dress girls, the dignified pace of the women's traditional dancers. Each man, each woman, each child, all dressed in their dreamed of colors, ribbons flying, fringes swaying, all beautiful, all dancing to the heartbeat. Around the circle we all go at night, together weaving a basket. Now, what I got from that paragraph was many things, but I love, so those of us who've been to the powwow, hopefully most of us have. If not, I'll try to explain it as best I can. So everything is the four directions, and at the powwow circle, it is kind of set up the same way, and we're all dancing around the center, just as if you were weaving a basket. And I loved that analogy. Making a basket is just all of us at community, at gathering at the powwow circle, with the heartbeat, which is the center. And when I first read that, I had to pause for a little bit because I had so many epiphanies coming in at the same time. So I'd love to know if you had the same thoughts, or if not, what other things came into your mind. And I apologize for my voice, but it is high hay fever season. The pollen count is super high in Tennessee right now. So I apologize. So that is wrapping up our we gosh, I gotta get this closer to my face. Wigosh Gopikin, a Black Ash Basket chapter. Now we are moving on to Mishko's Kinomagwin, the teachings of grass. Now in this chapter, it's a little bit different from her other ones. Um, she has set it up like a research assignment. And if you've read it, it's because it was a research assignment for one of her grad students or undergrad. I think it was one of her undergrad students. Um, so it's really clever. So she's got an introduction, literature review, hypothesis, all these different sections, just as if it was a research paper, because it was. So let's do the introduction. And we had similar wording in the first paragraph. So we're kind of revisiting the story of Sweetgrass. You can smell it before you see it. A sweetgrass meadow on a summer day. The scent flickers on the breeze. You sniff like a dog on a scent, and then it's gone, replaced by the boggy tang of wet ground. And then it's back, the sweet vanilla fragrance, beckoning. Lena is not fooled easily, though. She wanders into the meadow with the certainty of her years, parting grasses with her slender form. A tiny, gray-haired elder, she is up to her waist in grass. She casts her gaze over all other species and then makes a beeline to a patch that to the uninitiated looks like all the rest. She runs a ribbon of grass through the thumb and forefinger of her wrinkled brown hand. See how glossy it is. It can hide from you among the others, but it wants to be found. That's why it shines like that. But then she passes this patch by letting it slide through her fingers. She obeys the teachings of her ancestors to never take the first plant that you see. I follow behind her as her hands trail lovingly over the boneset and the goldenrod. She spies a gleam in the sward, and her step quickens. Ah, Bosho, she says, hello. From the pocket of her old nylon jacket, she takes out her pouch, deerskin with beaded red edge, and she shakes a little tobacco into the palm of her hand. Eyes closed, murmuring, she raises a hand to the four directions and then scatters the tobacco on the ground. You know this, she says, her eyebrows a question mark. To always leave a gift for the plants, to ask if we might take them. It would be rude not to ask first. Only then does she stop and pinch off a grass stem at its base, careful not to disturb the roots. She parts the nearby clumps, finds another and another until she has gathered a thick sheaf of shining stem. A winding path marks her progress where the meadow canopy was opened by the trail of her passage. She passes right by many dense patches, leaving them to sway in the breeze. It's our way, she says, to take only what we need. I've always been told that you never take more than half. Sometimes she doesn't take any at all, but just comes out to check on the meadow to see how the plants are doing. Our teachings, she says, are very strong. They wouldn't get handed on if they weren't useful. The most important thing to remember is what my grandmother always said. If we use a plant respectfully, it will stay with us and flourish. If we ignore it, it will go away. If you didn't give it respect, it will leave us. The plants themselves has shown us this. Mishkos Kinamagwin. As we leave the meadow for the path back through the woods, she twists a handful of timothy into a loose knot upon itself beside the trail. This tells other pickers that I've been here, she says, so that they know not to take any more. Okay, so moving on, I'm on page 158, and with a little background or just for us to go over, Robin has asked one of her undergrad students to do a research paper on why sweetgrass seems to be disappearing. Um, so, just so you know that, and that's why this chapter is done in scientific kind of format to show this. So, Laurie was eager to begin. That's her undergrad student, but she hadn't met sweetgrass before. It's the grass that will teach you, I advised, so you have to get to know it. I took her out to our restored sweetgrass meadows, and it was love at first sniff. It didn't take her long to recognize sweetgrass after that. It was as if the plant wanted her to find it. Together we designed experiments to compare the effects of the two harvesting methods. That's one thing we didn't cover. There was some other people who, when they harvest sweetgrass, will just yank it out, and it yanks out the whole plant because they were told how to do that. They, for some reason, they were taught to not just take a blade, but they would take at least half of the plant, roots and all. So Laurie and Robin, but mainly Laurie, is researching if any of these methods have a are they the reason why sweetgrass is disappearing? Is it because of over harvesting or the way they harvest, or is there something else? Okay, but I wanted her to live out a slightly different style of research. To me, an experiment is a kind of conversation with plants. I have a question for them, but since we don't speak the same language, I can't ask them directly, and they won't answer verbally. But plants can be eloquent in their physical responses and behaviors. Plants answer questions by the way they live, by their responses to change. You just need to learn how to ask. I smile when I hear my colleagues say, I discovered X. That's kind of like Columbus claiming to have discovered America. It was here all along. It's just that he didn't know it. Experiments are not about discovery, but about listening and translating the knowledge of other beings. I loved that so much. My colleagues might scoff at the notion of basket makers as scientists, but when Lena and her daughters take 50% of the sweetgrass, observed the result, evaluate their findings, and then create management guidelines from them, that sounds a lot like experimental science to me. Generations of data collections and validation through time builds up to well tested theories. This was interesting to me because I hear comments a lot. And the racist comments, basically, I don't, it's just very ignorant comments I get, and it's happening more and more. The last 4 years were, it seemed like I would get racist comments just out of the blue that didn't happen before. But I get told quite often by non natives that are just ignorant and don't want to learn, but they'll say that the indigenous people should be grateful that they'll use the word conquered a lot because we didn't even know what the wheel was, or we didn't know how to survive. And I think that's hilarious because we survived just fine. Our ancestors just fine without them. Excuse me. So, um, when I hear things that Robin is explaining how we knew science, I mean, we cultivated corn, we had fields, and we fed people, and we knew the land, and we know the land. But we also knew math. Our ancestors, you think about all the beadwork and all the artistry, all the basket making, you had to know math. You had to know algebra in order to do that, and geometry. And so to say that we had absolutely no education or advanced knowledge other than survival is just incredibly silly to me. And I could go off on it for a long time on that, but I won't. I will spare you all. But I loved that she brought that excerpt in on um, that we may not have scientific journals and peer reviews, but Indigenous people have been practicing science and botany and math and astrology for time immemorial, and we did just fine. Okay, moving on. Now, I really hope you read this chapter because it goes through Laurie's experience with misogyny in the academic field, as well as she is pregnant and has a baby. And it just goes through this beautiful, kind of harmonious, alongside she's growing a baby within her, and she's doing field work at the same time. And women scientists, there's not as many as men because of the system, but she is just trailblazing through this. And so then she has baby Celia was born in the early fall, and a braid of sweetgrass was hung over her crib. While Celia slept nearby, Laurie put her data on the computer and began to make the comparisons between the harvesting methods. From the twist ties on every stem, Laurie could chart the births and deaths of the sample plots. Some plots were full of new young shoots that signaled a thriving population, and some were not. Her statistical analysis were all sound and thorough, but she hardly needed graphs to tell the story. From across the field, you could see the difference. Some plots gleamed shiny gold and green, and some were dull and brown. The committee's criticism hovered in her mind. Anyone knows that harvesting a plant will damage the population. The surprise was that the failing plots were not the harvested ones, as predicted, but the unharvested controls. The sweetgrass that had not been picked or disturbed in any way was choked with dead stems, while the harvested plants were thriving. Even though half of all stems had been harvested each year, they quickly grew back, completely replacing everything that had been gathered. In fact, producing more shoots than what were present before harvest. Picking sweetgrass seemed to actually stimulate growth. In the first year's harvest, the plants that grew the very best were the ones that had been yanked up in its handful, but when it was pinched singly or pulled in a clump, the end result was nearly the same. It didn't seem to matter how the grass was harvested, only that it was. Laurie's graduate committee had dismissed this possibility from the outset. They had been taught that harvesting causes decline, and yet the grasses themselves unequivocally argued the opposite point. After the grilling Laurie received over her research proposal, you might imagine she was dreading the thesis defense. But she had one thing skeptical scientists value most: data. While Celia was slept in her proud father's arms, Laurie presented her graphs and tables to demonstrate that sweetgrass flourishes when it is harvested and declines when it is not. The doubting dean was silent. The basket maker smiled. Okay, so we're going to finish up. I'm on 165 at the bottom. The question was, how do we show respect? Sweetgrass told us the answer as we experimented. Sustainable harvesting can be the way we treat a plant with respect, by respectfully receiving its gift. Perhaps it is no coincidence that it is sweetgrass that reveals this story. Wingashk was the first to be planted by Sky Woman on the back of a turtle island. The grass gives its fragrant self to us, and we receive it with gratitude. And we return, through the very act of accepting the gift, the pickers open some space, let the light come in, and with a gentle tug bestir the dormant buds that make new grass. Reciprocity is a matter of keeping the gift in motion through self-perpetuating cycles of giving and receiving. Our elders taught that the relationship between plants and humans must be one of balance. People can take too much and exceed the capacity of the plants to share again. That's the voice of hard experience that resonates in the teachings of never take more than half. And yet, they also teach that we can take too little. If we allow traditions to die, relationships to fade, the land will suffer. These laws are the product of hard experience, of past mistakes. And not all plants are the same. Each has its own way of regenerating. Some, unlike sweetgrass, are easily harmed by harvest. Lena would say that the key is to know them well enough to respect the difference. With their tobacco and their thanks, our people say to the sweetgrass, I need you. By its renewal after picking, the grass says to the people, I need you too. Mishkos Kenawagwan, isn't this the lesson of grass? Through reciprocity, the gift is replenished. All of our flourishing is mutual. In a field of tall grass with only the wind for company, there is a language that transcends the differences between scientific and traditional understandings, the data or the prayer. The wind moves and carries the grass song. It sounds to me like a mishkos, over and over again on ripples of moving grass. After all it has taught us, I want to say thank you. Wingashk, Buffalo, Lena, and the ancestors. This was beautiful and very important lesson. I love the way that Robin writes. It's so poetic. I can't think of her analogies, and her descriptive text is like poetry. And I think that's why we need that pause after one or two chapters, or even after a paragraph or two. Just that pause to let it sink in like you would a poem, because it is so descriptive. And like I get several epiphanies at the same time while reading. And because I love her writing style. You know that she's lived it. She's had this lesson and she's sharing it with the rest of us. So I think that's a great place for us to end. My hay fever, my allergies are also telling me it's time. So please read these chapters, drop your comments in the comments section, and we'll have a discussion. I would really love to know your stories, or what these passages maybe prompted you to envision or think about. So please share those in the comments. And I hope you have a wonderful week. Enjoy the springtime, even if you have hay fever. Get out there and enjoy it, and give thanks and acknowledgement to everything. I think the world would be a lot better if we use these practices every day. So have a wonderful week. Minogeshget. Chimegwich. Thank you. Bama P. Until later. For every Indigenous Author Monday video that I put out, I am dedicating it to the One Shelf Project put on by Gadakana. Gadakana is an Indigenous organization, a 501c3 nonprofit, tax-deductible organization that provides books in their local libraries that are actually accurate, historically accurate, and by Indigenous authors, both fiction and nonfiction. And their goal is to at least have a shelf dedicated to Indigenous accurate information in their local libraries. They can only do this with help through donors, and they need your help. I will put the link down here, so please check them out. The One Shelf Project, another organization near and dear to my heart. Gadakana.